All right. Hi, everybody. Today I am going to try and cover how to render a scene in passes. Basically, what that means is that instead of just saving every rendered frame as a flat image, it's going to render every frame as a number of images encoded with information regarding the texture and the lighting of your scene. And if you wanted to then, after rendering, for instance, change like specifically the specularity or specifically the emission, then you could, using a program like After Effects, you could then edit those specific things. Whereas normally you wouldn't be able to do that because it was just, a flat image. Rendering in passes is a little bit of a more tedious and time-consuming way of doing it. And obviously regarding, depending on the size of your scene, it's going to take a really long time, potentially. But, hopefully at the end it's worth it. So I have a very simple scene set up here currently. We have a cylinder that has a glass preset texture, a cube that has a copper preset texture, a sphere that has the balloon preset texture, and another cube which has just the incandescent bulb preset texture. So if you go to material attributes of this object, and you go to AI standard surface, I assign an AI standard surface to all of these objects, and then I just went to presets, selected the preset, and said replace all selected, and that's how I got these preset textures. So what I want to do first is, because we, for argument's sake, are going to do a rendered playblast, so I also want to cover how to constrain a camera to a curve and how you would go about setting that up. So let's do that first. You're going to go over to curves and surfaces. You're gonna create this circular curve, scale that up so that it spans your whole scene. Let's just move it up a little. That should be fine. Alright, then you're gonna go over to create at the top of the toolbar, and you're gonna go to cameras and select the very first one. And then move your camera so that it is in line with your curve, more or less. Then what you need to do is you need to make sure that you are in animation mode at the top left hand side of your screen. And if you don't see the timeline at the bottom of your interface the way I do, you just go to the top right hand side of your screen, go to workspace, and set it to Maya General. So now that you've made sure that you're in animation mode, you're going to click on your camera and shift select your curve. Then you're going to go to constrain at the top of your toolbar, and you're going to go to motion path and say attach to motion path. And what that'll do is constrain the camera to the curve that you've created. So if you press play, it should give you something like this. Now, depending on the amount of frames you have, it's going to be either really fast or really slow. So maybe let me rather give this animation 200 frames and 200 frames, and let's see if that... I might have had to do that. Yeah, I might have had to do that prior to it. Ooh. Let's see. Let's see now. Constrain motion path, attach to motion path. Let's see now. Yeah, that's better. Okay. So, obviously, if we're doing a playblast, we don't want to look at our scene from the perspective view. So, if you Let me just unhide my physical sun and sky so that we can actually see our objects. So if you go to the render view, hopefully it decides not to take its sweet time. Is this the render? There we go. If you go to your render view, you can see your objects, but if you want to look at your objects the way you would for a playblast, you would just go over here next to beauty where it says perspective shape, because that's the view that you're currently looking at your objects from, and you're going to select camera shape 1, which is the camera that you've created. And now if you drag your mouse across your timeline, you can see that this is the way that your camera perceives your screen, and that's how it'll look in your playblast. So that's all good and well. So now that we're happy with this setup, we can dive into how you have to set up your interface so that you can render in passes. So you're gonna go ahead and go to render settings, which is this little clipboard with the gear next to it, and in the common window you can select the file name prefix, which is basically the name that it'll export your photos as. So like I said, even if you're rendering a video, if you're rendering it in passes, you will be rendering it as individual frames rather than a whole video. That is just for, you can select maybe like frame 1 to 10 that you want to render, and instead of like rendering the whole scene at one time, and then if something gets lost, your whole scene isn't lost, you just have to redo like 10 frames. So it's just better practice, I guess, to do it this way, instead of rendering it as a video file. So for my file name prefix, just so it's easier for me to find, I'm just gonna call this render tut. Okay, and we want to, for image format, we want it to be EXR because that saves all the layer information and it makes it editable. We don't want to compress it. You can compress it if you want. I don't really care about that at the moment. Then here where it says metadata, you're going to go to color space and select raw, and you're going to go to frame animation extension, and you're going to select the one that says name #extension. And then by frame range you can select how many frames you want to render out, and which frames that would be. So for the sake of this tutorial, I only want to render until the 5th frame, because anything else is just going to take a little bit too long. Then we're going to go over to AOVs, the AOVs window, and you're basically going to select everything, all the layers that you want saved. So anything to do with the textures of your objects you want to activate. So I'm going to activate albedo, and coat, albedo, direct, albedo, indirect, all of these. Going to do the diffuse as well. Just send that over. Emission, opacity, shadow, specular, and shadow, diffuse, and mask. I think for now that should be alright. Let's take the SSS as well. Okay, that should be good. So basically that activates, what this does, it activates all the different layer informations that you want saved during the rendering process. So once you're happy with that, you can just close. And now if you go to your render view, and you press play, you can see that you now, if you click on this little space that says beauty, you can find all the other layer informations that you have activated. And it just shows you how your objects look in these different layers. And yeah, so this is how you would be able to, edit everything individually. The beauty frame, just FYI, shows all of those layers together. Okay, so you've got that, and you've got your camera view, and you have said that you're going to export frame 1 to 5. And so now what you have to do is you're gonna go to the left top hand side of your screen, and where you were once in animation mode, now you're going to go over to rendering, and you're going to press render at the top of your toolbar, and say render sequence, but you're going to click on that little box next to it, and current camera is camera 1, and you're going to select the file destination for it. Let's go over here. Okay, and that should be good. Then you're just going to press render sequence and close. Make sure that if you're doing a playblast, you want to actually render it from the camera's perspective, so make sure you have selected your camera, and then you say render sequence and close. And what it's going to do now is the program is going to start to render every single one of the frames that you've told it to render, and it's going to render all the information that you have activated separately. So we're just going to give it its time to do that quickly. Luckily I only selected 5 frames, so it's not going to look very different from one frame to the next, because what is 5 frames against 200? So when it's done, that little window should close and you should be left with this. And if you go to your files and you go to the destination that you saved it at, you will see that you now have all these different folders, and if you click on one, you have all the different layer information of that specific part of the frame saved here as an EXR file. And if you wanted to edit like specifically the way the code looks in your final render, then you can, in After Effects, edit that specifically. In fact, you can edit the code albedo specifically. So yeah, now you basically have all of that information from frame 1 to 5 saved in separate files, and you can compile them, you can edit them to your heart's content, and that's basically all there is to it. Like I said, I unfortunately do not have After Effects on my home PC, so I can't show you how you would go about compiling your video or compiling your images, but this is how you would do the rendering part of it. I hope this at least helps with a little bit of it, and see you next time.